Hi guys, welcome to week 5. This week's topic is language. Just a reminder, there is no reaction paper due this week, so please don't do one and enjoy the time off and maybe spend some time catching up on past material. So let's talk a little bit about language. This isn't a linguistics class, but language is obviously completely intertwined with culture, and so it's important to talk about how language can be a barrier for intercultural communication. So there's a lot of information within this chapter about what languages are popular in the world. Maybe some of those were kind of surprising to you or interesting, especially considering the kind of languages that people generally study in high school and college. It doesn't really line up with what globally people are speaking a lot. There were a lot of linguistic terms within this chapter. And one of them was phonology, which is the sound system of language, how words are pronounced, which sounds are meaningful. And so, for example, even in American English, the word route or route, in different parts of the country, some people say route and some people say route. Has nothing to do with accents, it's just a different phonetic way to pronounce the same word. We also have semantics, which is the study of meaning, and that is how words communicate the meaning that we intend to get across. So this is sometimes a single word, and sometimes this can be words put together. And as an example, sometimes there's words that mean the same thing, but have different implications culturally. On the other hand, there can be words that are different but mean the exact same thing. So in British English, people say lift, whereas in American English, we say elevator. Semantics is the structure of language and how the word order matters. Most languages have rules that exist about the word order. So in English, we would say the dog ran. We say noun and then verb. That isn't always the case in every language. And so if one learns a language, they also have to take in consideration how things are organized. Pragmatics is the study of how languages are used in different contexts. And so there were 5 ways in which we use language: to give information, to control others' behavior, to communicate feelings, to participate in rituals, and then to execute plans. And of course, there's a contextual element to all of this. The context in which people are speaking has an effect on what message is being communicated. Also, there's perception. So, for example, sarcasm. You can say something sarcastically, and if I pick up that you're saying it sarcastically, I know that you don't really mean it. Whereas if you just read the written text, and you probably all had this experience reading in an email, someone said something sarcastic, and you didn't know that they meant to be sarcastic, so it was confusing. Within that, we also have labels. And the labels that we use to refer to other people can impact the perceptions. So, for example, if I say disabled or handicapped, that has a meaning attached to it that you understand, but it also can trap you within understanding what that is. So, for example, deaf people don't consider themselves disabled. And so if you say, oh, there's a deaf person and she's disabled, that could be quite offensive to her and you had no idea. Within that, we also had the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that looks at the language that we speak and how that affects our reality. And the classic example of this is that Inuits or Eskimos have 80 words for different types of snow because that's relevant to their life and what's important. So that it also, people argue what that hypothesis really means, and you can read more about it in the book, but it's an interesting example of what language can mean for the way people live. So there's also how people treat language. So in some cultures, writing is more valuable than speech. In other cultures, speech is more valuable than writing. And in the US, speech is usually valued, and being able to speak in an articulate way is a really highly valued skill in the US. Being a good listener is not as important in the US, whereas in other cultures, being a good listener is the primary task. Silence in the US is usually viewed negatively, but in other cultures, silence is a virtue. And so when you're engaging in intercultural communication, you have to acknowledge that these differences exist. We also had high context versus low context communication. So high context is indirect, and most of the message is internalized, whereas low context is very direct, and the bulk of the meaning resides in the words themselves. We also have direct versus indirect. Direct is when the verbal messages reveal the true intentions. So people that talk a lot with their hands, for example, would be sending a very direct message. An indirect style would be when the true intentions are masked and you really have to pay attention to other cues, nonverbal, for example, to know what the meaning is. Elaboration versus understated styles. The elaboration style is a rich, expressive style. The understated is simple assertions and silence, and different cultures tend to go in different directions with this. So just because a culture may tend to be one of these styles doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in that culture is that way, and so it's important to acknowledge that there are exceptions, that cultures are not homogeneous. Now, when we're talking about language and power, all language is very powerful, and language is used differently in different people. So, for example, the way that you talk to your mom is different than the way that you talk to your friend. The way that you talk to your grandmother or the way that you talk to your boss, it's different in each different circumstance. And so acknowledging that those have to do a lot with power roles and the role that you play with that person is important, and that you are very cognizant of the role in which you are and the person that you're talking to. Within this, you also have assimilation strategies. So, for example, if you are working in an environment where, and you're a man, and the environment is all women, and women talk to each other in a certain way, you as a man are possibly going to assimilate to that style of communication because that's the dominant power group. Or you can think about this like high school lunch tables. If you were in one group in high school and all of a sudden you're sitting at this other lunch table, it's a strategy that you might take is to assimilate to the other group's style of speaking. You also have accommodation, whereas you are blending into the group. So if you're going to the other kid's lunch table, you don't completely assimilate into their way of speaking, but you acknowledge that there are differences. So that's accommodation. There's also assertive accommodation, which is sort of polite, talking, trying to strike a balance, bringing up logical points, whereas aggressive accommodation would be making a major point about the fact that there are differences between the power groups. Others opt just to separate, so that kid at the lunch table never leaves her lunch table. And within that, there can be aggressive strategies where there can be attacking and sabotaging other groups, whereas assertive strategies would just be stressing strengths and embracing stereotypes. Within this chapter, we also talked a lot about people that are multilingual or bilingual, and so bilinguals speak 2 languages. Sometimes people speak with both with native level fluency, but not always. It depends on what kind of environment you grew up in. Multilinguals also exist that speak many different languages. There's also a discussion with argot and verlan, which are ways of playing with language to distinguish outsiders from insiders. Translation and interpretation, make sure that you know the difference. Interpretation is verbal and translation is written, and that equivalency is really important, that it's not about translating or interpreting every single word, it's about making sure that the meaning is expressed. There's also a lot of language politics, that some nations have multiple languages. In the US, there's a debate about if English should be the official language. And this has a lot to do with politics of culture and class, and who respects whom. So all in all, language is a really important topic. I hope you enjoyed the chapter and kind of thought about your own language needs. Again, no writing assignment this week, but be sure to post in the discussion forums and take the quiz and reply to the discussion postings. Thanks.